Part 1: The Secret War Inside the Ones Who Were Never Meant to Be Saved. There was a man I once met in the mountains of northern India. He carried the kind of silence that made you forget how loud the world had been. People called him cursed, haunted, even dangerous. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something ancient, something that had walked through countless lifetimes of shadow and still carried a flicker of light in its chest. He told me without emotion that he had once been possessed not by one demon but by many. He had served darkness willingly. He had tasted power, control, seduction. And yet, after all of it, he had chosen to walk away not into sainthood, but into sacred rebellion. He said, "The devil gave me everything, and I gave it all back just to remember who I was." That was the first day I understood what a dark chosen one truly. We must begin with a truth most spiritual teachings are too afraid to say out loud. Not all light workers come from light. Some of us were forged in the fire of something far more ancient, far more chaotic. We didn't start our journey in temples or ashrams. We started in trauma, in survival, in rage. We were the ones who saw spirits before we could speak, who felt emotions that weren't ours, who danced with shadows in our dreams while the world told us we were simply sensitive. But we weren't sensitive, we were marked. Marked not for punishment but for initiation. And while others came to earth to ascend, we came to descend into the depths of distortion, to retrieve the forgotten fragments of divine truth buried in the underworld. You may be one of them. You may have wondered why your awakening didn't feel peaceful, why your energy didn't open with bliss, but with breakdown. Why every time you tried to rise in vibration, something pulled you back down. That pull wasn't failure, it was a summons. Because dark chosen ones don't rise by escaping the dark. We rise by owning it, by seeing it, by walking through it without becoming it. And in that walk, we gather power, but not the kind of power that dominates, the kind that liberates, the kind that can look a demon in the eye and say, "You have no home here."
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So what is a dark chosen one? It is a soul that volunteered to be born into density, not to be consumed by it, but to transmute it. You came here not to avoid the demonic, but to understand it from the inside. You have felt possession not as horror, but as temptation. You've been offered deals. You've heard the whispers. You've tasted the kind of metaphysical power that would terrify most light workers. And still, you chose the harder path. Not the path of denial, but of discipline. You chose to face the demon, not to banish it, but to reclaim the part of you it fed on. That's the first secret of how we overcome demonic influence. We don't fight it with fear. We don't spray sage and scream invocations. We sit with it. We listen. We ask it what part of us it's been speaking to. Because every demon lives inside a wound. Every entity attaches to a frequency already present in us. And the moment we stop pretending we're pure and start becoming whole, the demon begins to lose its grip, not because we exiled it, but because we no longer needed it to carry our pain. But this is not easy, because when you've lived under demonic influence, it becomes familiar. It becomes identity. It gives you a sense of power when the world has stripped you of your worth. And so, letting go of it feels like death. That's why most don't. That's why many spiritual practitioners secretly cling to their shadows, even as they post about light. Because the demon doesn't always attack you. Sometimes it becomes your brand, your style, your edge. And when that happens, you're not possessed, you're partnered. And that is far more dangerous. So how do dark chosen ones break these partnerships? We do it through radical self-honesty. We stop blaming old traumas. We stop blaming the matrix. We stop blaming low vibrations. We ask the brutal question, where am I still benefiting from this darkness? What do I gain by staying fragmented? What am I afraid I'll lose if I fully heal? Because demons don't need your fear. They need your loyalty. And loyalty is not just about devotion. It's about resonance. As long as you resonate with the frequency of control, manipulation, guilt, or rage, you are still calling it home. The second secret is transmutation through embodiment. We cannot overcome demonic influence by escaping the body. We must come back into it. The body is the temple. It is the vault. It is where the codes of your divine identity are stored. And when you disconnect from it, you become vulnerable to occupation. Demons don't need to break in, they wait for you to abandon yourself. That's why sacred movement, breathwork, and nervous system regulation are not optional. They are essential, because the more fully you inhabit your vessel, the less room there is for anything else to hide. We must also understand that light is not always soft. There is a fierce light, the kind that burns through illusion, the kind that pierces through deception. That is the light we call upon. Not to beautify ourselves, but to expose what's been pretending to be us. Because one of the most dangerous things about demonic influence is how well it mimics your voice. It will sound like your intuition. It will speak in your tone. It will even give you spiritual downloads. But the difference is this: it will always come with a cost, a demand, a subtle contract. True light never bargains. It only reveals. So ask yourself, do the voices I hear empower me or enslave me? Do my gifts feel like freedom or obligation? Am I healing because I choose to, or because something in me believes I must? These questions are not easy, but they are necessary. Because until you know who's speaking inside your field, you cannot reclaim your throne. Many of us were trained by darkness before we knew what light was. We learned protection before we learned love. We learned to manipulate energy before we learned to surrender to it. And now we must unlearn. Not to erase our past, but to reassign it. Because everything we experienced, every possession, every psychic attack, every inner war, it all built a spiritual muscle that most people never develop. It gave us an edge. But that edge is not meant to be a weapon. It's meant to be a key that unlocks portals others are too afraid to open. That is why dark chosen ones are feared, not because we are dark, but because we are sovereign. We cannot be easily fooled. We cannot be seduced by false light. We do not fall for spiritual performance. We see through masks because we've worn them. We recognize lies because we once told them. And that is our power, not in being better, but in being honest. We don't preach purity. We practice integration. And that is what unseats the demonic, not the chanting, not the oils, not the rituals, but the refusal to be anything other than fully, brutally, radiantly real. So let us remember, the path is not about becoming more light. It is about becoming more you, fully, fiercely, and unapologetically you. Because in that truth, demons starve. In that embodiment, shadows collapse. In that love for your scars, your rage, your story, you become untouchable. And that is just the beginning of the return. Part 2, the exorcism of identity. Reclaiming the self you were trained to forget. There is a moment in every dark chosen one's journey where you stop fearing the demon and start questioning the self that invited it. Not because you are evil, not because you were weak, but because you were fragmented. You see, demons don't just feed on trauma, they feed on confusion. On the spaces in your psyche where you haven't decided who you truly are. And when you split your identity to survive, you create a vacancy, a spiritual vacancy, and something always fills it. Sometimes it's an addiction. Sometimes it's a belief. Sometimes it's a spirit that whispers just the right lie at just the right time. And you believe it because it tells you what you needed to hear in your weakest moment. That's how demonic influence begins in the life of a dark chosen one. Not with possession, but with permission. You gave permission not by saying yes, but by not saying no. By not choosing yourself when it mattered most. By letting the voice of pain define your power. And over time, that voice becomes familiar. It becomes your inner monologue. It tells you who to trust, what to fear, what to chase. And before you know it, you are not living your life, you are living a program. A script written by pain, edited by fear, and directed by something that is not invested in your liberation. But here's the truth. Identity is the battleground of every chosen soul. Because who you believe you are determines what you allow. If you believe you are broken, you will magnetize saviors. If you believe you are powerful, you will magnetize tests. If you believe you are still in process, you will attract mirrors. But if you know deep in your bones that you are a sovereign being, encoded with divine light, forged in sacred fire, and chosen to walk through shadow not as a victim but as a vessel of remembrance, then no demon, no entity, no distortion can hold you. Because identity is not just a concept, it is a frequency. And your frequency either repels or welcomes spiritual influence. So let's go deeper. What part of your identity is still up for negotiation? What part of you still believes healing must come through suffering? Who taught you that pain was proof of depth? That chaos meant you were growing? That spiritual conflict was a badge of honor? We must question these mantras, because many of them were embedded by forces that do not want you to heal, they want you to linger, to stay in the loop, to keep processing forever. Because as long as you are still processing, you are not creating. And dark chosen ones were not sent here to endlessly purge. We were sent here to build. That's the next secret. Creation is the most powerful form of exorcism. When you create from sovereignty, you rewrite the code that demons have been feeding on. You disrupt the pattern. You shatter the loop. You stop being a reactor and start becoming a transmitter. And demons cannot feed from a transmitter of divine truth. They need you to stay in reaction. They need you to stay in commentary. They need you to keep seeking, because the moment you become source, the game ends. So ask yourself, where have I been looping instead of leading? Where have I been healing endlessly instead of declaring completion? Where have I been waiting for permission to be whole? These are not surface reflections. These are soul-level initiations. Because the demon doesn't fear your rituals. It fears your decision. The moment you decide that your story ends differently, that your power is no longer negotiable, that your past is no longer your prophesy, that's when the entity begins to unravel. Because now you're not just resisting it, you're replacing it. And this is where light comes in, not the soft ambient light of love and light culture, but the surgical light of divine will. This light doesn't just soothe, it sears. It cuts through programming. It exposes every place where you've hidden your own power, where you've outsourced your knowing, where you've played small to stay safe. This light is not comfortable. It will burn away everything false. But that's what makes it holy. And only dark chosen ones can carry it without being destroyed by it. Because we've already walked through fire. We've already died to our old selves. We know how to rebuild from ash. You must become that light. Not in theory, but in embodiment. You must walk into every situation, every relationship, every room with the unspoken frequency. I will not abandon myself here. That is the new exorcism. Not casting something out, but refusing to leave yourself behind. And when you hold that vibration, demons cannot attach. because they only enter when there's a vacancy. But when you are fully present, fully claimed, fully embodied, there is no room for manipulation. Only resonance, only truth. There is also a deeper level of spiritual warfare that most don't talk about. It's not just about negative spirits or entities. It's about false guides. Spirits that pretend to be of the light, that offer you visions, gifts, status, that speak in tones that sound divine but are just slightly off. They flatter your ego. They give you identity. They offer you shortcuts, but slowly, your soul starts to feel distant. Your body starts to feel heavy. Your joy becomes performative. And your intuition, once a clear stream, becomes mud. These guides are not here to help you ascend. They are here to hijack your mission. Because if they can't destroy you, they'll distract you. They'll keep you in the astral playground, chasing light codes, decoding star maps, obsessing over timelines while your body slowly disconnects from the earth, from humanity, from love. And that is the ultimate corruption, when a chosen one forgets why they came. You didn't come to be a galactic celebrity. You came to anchor heaven into hell. You came to bring light into the places that forgot it existed. So how do we clear these false frequencies? First, we reclaim our discernment. We stop asking, does this feel powerful? And start asking, does this feel true? We stop chasing the spectacular and start honoring the simple. We stop needing external confirmation and start trusting our internal compass. Because your soul knows, your body knows. The question is, will you listen? Even if it means losing your spiritual identity. This is where most fall. They've built a life around their gifts, around their followers, around their image. And to let go of a false guide would mean letting go of who they've become. But for the dark chosen ones, that death is sacred. We are not afraid to burn down the temple if the fire leads us back to truth. We will die 1,000 identities to remember the one that was never corrupted. This is the path, not of light versus dark, but of integration beyond illusion. A path where you do not reject your shadow, but neither do you let it lead. A path where you do not fear demons, but neither do you dance with them. A path where you remember that your power is not in your gifts, your visions, or your guides, but in your ability to choose truth over comfort, again and again and again. So if you've been wondering how to break free, if you felt the pull of something dark, something seductive, something false, if you've been tired of healing, tired of fighting, tired of pretending, then this is your moment, not to rise, but to return. Part 3, the final eclipse. When the demon bows to the one who remembers, there is a sacred moment in every dark chosen one's journey when the demon no longer needs to be cast out because it begins to bow. Not to you as an ego, not to your rituals, not to your spiritual performance, but to the truth that you have finally embodied. This moment cannot be faked. It cannot be forced. It only arrives when you stop needing to prove your light and instead live it. When you stop trying to save the world and instead become whole within yourself. Because the war was never really out there. It was never about defeating demons in the sky or purging entities from the air. It was about reclaiming the thrones inside your own psyche that you had abandoned. And when those thrones are occupied again, the war ends. Not because the enemy dies, but because you no longer feed it. Most people think that overcoming demonic influence is about violence, about force, about invoking names and calling down fire. But that is still playing the demon's game, still dancing in duality. The deeper truth is that spiritual darkness isn't always here to destroy you. Sometimes it's here to test your memory, to ask again and again, do you remember who you are? Even when everything is stripped, even when no one believes you, even when your light is buried under lifetimes of pain, power, and programming. Do you still remember? Because if you do, then you've already won. Let's talk about the final phase of transmutation. This is where many fall short, because it demands not just courage, but radical intimacy with your own power. You've seen the shadows. You've danced with them. You've learned their names. But now you must look at them not as enemies, but as teachers. Not to befriend them, but to integrate the message they carried. Every demon in your life has only ever asked you one thing: will you abandon yourself again? And when your answer becomes a thunderous no, not just in words but in vibration, they lose access. Not because you chased them out, but because you closed the door they used to enter. The door was never in the sky. It was never in the ritual. It was always in the unclaimed self, the version of you that still believed you needed saving, that still waited for external validation, that still thought pain was proof of depth. That self was the portal. And when you reclaim it, when you forgive it, embody it and love it, you collapse the portal. You become sealed, not through protection spells, but through presence. A presence so complete, so unwavering, that no distortion can find a foothold inside you. This is the moment your light becomes weaponized not against others, but against illusion. You no longer seek to be spiritual. You simply are. You no longer chase mystical experiences. You become the mystic. You no longer perform healing. You become the field that heals. And in that frequency, you become untouchable, not because you're above pain, but because you're through it. You've walked through every layer of hell and came out with the one treasure the demon hoped you'd never find: your memory. So what now? What does a dark chosen one do when the war ends? When the entity is gone, the noise is quiet. The shadows are seen, and the path is clear. You begin to create, not for performance, not for validation, but because creation is the purest expression of sovereignty. You birth new realities. You speak new truths. You hold space for others, not to rescue them, but to remind them. You don't preach. You don't persuade. You don't demand. You simply exist in such fullness that your field becomes a living transmission of divine order. And yet, this is not the end of the journey. Because the path of the dark chosen one is not linear. It spirals. It deepens. It returns. You will face the invitation again. Not because you failed, but because you are now trusted with deeper layers. The demon may return not to possess, but to test your integration. It will offer you faster power, easier answers, shortcuts to influence. And you will smile, not with fear, not with pride, but with clarity. Because now you know you don't need what it offers. You have become what you once sought. This is the most dangerous thing you can do in the eyes of darkness. Refuse to be manipulated by your own pain, to no longer use it as currency, to no longer perform your wounds for attention, to no longer bind yourself to suffering as a path to significance. And when you do this, your entire energetic field shifts. You stop being a magnet for chaos. You stop attracting spiritual parasites. You stop needing cleansing every week, because your frequency becomes a firewall. Your truth becomes your sword, and your embodiment becomes your shield. So ask yourself right now, with no filter, what part of me still believes I need darkness to feel strong? What part of me is still secretly loyal to the pain that shaped me? What would happen if I gave myself full permission to be free, not just healed, but free? These questions are not the end, they are the doorway, and you must walk through them alone. Because no one can integrate your sovereignty for you. No one can embody your light but you. No one can cast out the illusions you still choose to believe. And when you do and you fully choose truth over trauma, presence over performance, creation over chaos, you don't just overcome demonic influence. You redeem it. You take back what it stole. You rewrite the contract. You become the master of the very forces that once mastered you. And in that mastery, you become a lighthouse for others, not through perfection, but through presence. The kind of presence that makes entities scatter. The kind of presence that reminds people who they are without saying a word. This is what it means to be a dark chosen one. Not to be feared, not to be worshipped, but to be remembered. As the one who walked into the dark not to escape, not to dominate, but to find the light no one else was willing to search for, and to bring it back, not as doctrine, not as dogma, but as embodiment. So let the demon bow. Let the shadows dissolve. Let the false guides fade.